And I think we're right at time again. Good timing. And next up, we've got Waseem Andrabi from KGL, who's going to talk to us about accessibility, and in particular around images. But accessibility is really an important topic for us, um, but in terms of just supporting the largest audiences possible. And whenever we talk about it, we always get a certain amount of feedback that that people agree that it's important, but some of the nuts and bolts are not always obvious. And so we thought it would be great to have Waseem talk a little bit about the capabilities that we've got, and what actually goes into it. So with that, Waseem.
Tom, thank you for that introduction. My name is Waseem Andrabi. I am the VP of Learning Solutions for KGL, and I primarily work on the book side of things, but there are similar issues around accessibility, both on books and journals and other types of products. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Let me share my screen before we get started. All right, so when we talk about accessibility, obviously there are a lot of factors, a lot of things that need to be addressed. One of the most important issues, I would, in my opinion, is around image accessibility. It's also something that is sometimes cost prohibitive, and that's one of the reasons why certain customers that we have seen are hesitant in making their products accessible. But we're going to talk about a little bit in terms of what it means. Some basic guidelines. We'll talk about some examples as well as we go along. First, what is accessibility? It's an approach that makes content available to users, including those users with disabilities who use assistive technologies to consume that content. Accessibility is also something that addresses content structure, formats, discoverability, and presentation of that content. It, as you make content accessible, it makes your base product more robust, and even users that do not need accessible or use accessible technologies, it helps those users as well. And we'll get into those details a little bit. Why should you make your products accessible? According to the WHO's recent World Report on Disability, they put the number of people who are what they refer to as disabled by society at about 15% of the total population of the world. That's over 1 billion people. That gives, if your products are accessible, it gives you access to a much bigger market. The products perform better. So if you go to a website that is fully accessible compared to a website that is not. So for example, if you go to the New York Times website and listen to the articles on the New York Times website, that experience is far better than a website that is not accessible for that matter. There are also compliance issues. There are many states where there is a legal requirement to have certain types of products be accessible. It gives you a competitive edge compared to any competitive products that might be out there that are not accessible. It makes the product as much future-proof as possible. And it's also the right thing to do. As in, I keep talking about it with many of our publishing customers, that it's not a matter of if we personally would need those products. It's just a matter of when. As in, everybody at some point in their life would need products to be accessible. And so help your future self by taking this initiative in your organizations and doing the right thing for today, and also for the future self, so to speak. So accessibility, in summary, can strengthen your brand, help you reach a wider audience, reduce the risk of legal complications, and improve your SEO and usability of the products. We're going to focus obviously on just the images part of it. Obviously, there's a lot more involved to make a product accessible, but this seems to be the biggest hurdle, just because of the cost and what you need to do, as far as making sure your product is accessible is concerned. There are three basic types of images that you would have obviously seen in your products. There are images that are decorative. If you see that the example on the right hand side of the slide, you would have chapter opener images and an image, at the top of an article that do not present important or essential content and are used primarily for layout or non-informative purposes, right? They do not actually give any additional information to the users. And typically the way we see it is they should even be removed from the semantic structural flow of content and not be even be addressed as far as, when screen readers are concerned or when some content is being read out. Then there are functional images, things that help a user, especially in a digital product environment, navigate the product. There could be submit buttons, there would be bars, that define what the user can do. So there are functional images that do require, some sort of treatment to make sure that those images are accessible. And then there are informative images that include, images that actually convey information in addition to the narrative text that is around them. So those are the images really that, we're going to focus on today. So we're going to get into certain, what are the basic guidelines to keep in mind when you're prepping your images. We believe in a philosophy of making sure that our products are sort of, any product that we work on is born accessible. It starts with, creation of that content or creation of those images. So if we kept these certain guidelines in mind, I think that would make life easier for everybody. So from an image perspective, as in we're going to talk about a few things, labels are very important in an image or can be important in an image. What are the basic things to keep in mind when creating images? Creating, the first thing is labels. Limit the number of fonts that are used. As in, if we use simpler fonts or non-overly complex fancy fonts, it keeps the focus on the actual content that is being addressed, or the information that is being addressed within those images. The recommended size, even though there is no minimum size for labels to pass accessibility tests, there is a recommended size of 12 points or 16 pixels and over. If there is too much text in an image, there could always, you could always think about ways to move that text out and put that into the narrative around that image. Obviously, simple labels are fine, but if there is a lot of descriptions, especially in an infographic type of an environment, we need to think about ways, or you could have your instructional designers or even your authors think about ways to move that text actually into the narrative text so that the image itself is as clean as possible. Then there are, we've seen in the past that there are publishers who like to keep certain things within a particular image. The standard guideline now is to take out information that doesn't actually have to be part of the image, which would be, credit information, names and titles, or even captions. Those should not be part of the image. The other important thing to talk about is contrast ratios, right? To make sure that users that are colorblind are able to differentiate between backgrounds and the images that are drawn on those backgrounds. The contrast is really a measure of luminance, or the brightness between the two colors, and is expressed as a ratio from let's say 1:1, which is white text on a white background, or 21:1, which is black text on white background. Pure red, for example, has a ratio of 4:1. Pure green is 1.4:1, and pure blue, I believe, is 8.6:1. So, so there are certain standards that must be met for contrast ratios so that images are accessible. What is recommended is using dark font colors on light backgrounds. Avoid the use of bright colors for backgrounds. Keep backgrounds as simple as possible. Contrast ratios for text should be 4.5 to 1 for text that is 18 points or lower, and 3:1 for text that's 18 points or greater. And visual elements should have an adequate contrast to adjacent elements. So anytime you have a red line and a green line, we need to make sure that there is a difference between the brightness of the two. So at least to the level of 3:1, so that users can differentiate them, because of the luminescence. The other way to do this would also be that you should be able to enlarge content up to 200%. So so if your label size is too small, a user with visual issues should be able to enlarge the image up to 200% to be able to clearly see what's being written. Use of color is very important as well. Obviously, the guideline can never be don't use color to differentiate things on an image, but let's not use color to be alone to present information. Even within text, so one of the things that we have to do many times is when we are looking at a product from an accessibility perspective, is to even read the narrative text to see if if only color is being used to present some information. For example, when something says the green line shows, or the red cell represents blah blah blah, those are items that we need to sort of stay away from. Also, like we talked about it, differentiate colors by hue and lightness. So light green and dark red, for example, would be okay, even though a user can be colorblind, they will be able to differentiate between the two based on the hue and lightness to once the contrast is addressed. And in addition to color, you can use patterns in charts and graphs to differentiate things. You can, for line graphs, for example, you can add unique geometrical shapes to differentiate colored lines and help users follow the path of the line, even if they cannot distinguish it from the color of other lines. Then adding high contrast borders to help visually separate different parts of a map, graph, or a chart are also important. The check that we can do is there are various tools available. I think WizTech is one of those tools that simulates what a colorblind person is going to see in a particular image. So we always encourage the use of those tools once an asset is finalized to make sure that even though you might have followed all the guidelines, that what is it that the colorblind person is actually able to see. And there are other tools available that correct those images as well. Some additional considerations. Photos are generally problematic from an accessibility perspective because you can only do so much, in terms of changing the contrast of the things within a photo. So need a little more specific, more consideration and more editing sometimes. Like we talked about it, provide larger and alternate versions of images when available. Try to reduce, what we refer to as the busyness of an image where possible, as in let's only present the information that is critical, that is useful, and avoid techniques that are used primarily to make content look pretty. Use of gradients, shadows, and reflections, come to mind there. And also to separate out different visual elements as much as possible without really changing the meaning of what is being presented, obviously, but try to space out elements as possible, labels or any chunks of text that might appear within images. Then once the image itself has been made accessible following these the guidelines, there are a few more guidelines that we haven't gotten into, but those were the basics. We also need to figure out whether an image needs alt text descriptions, right? So what does not need alt text descriptions would be your tables, if they are typeset correctly and are XML tagged. What tables do need, though, is a brief sort of orientation of the structure and the purpose of that table. This information sort of provides valuable content for a user who is about to be presented with an array of data, for example, right? Screen readers usually accommodate this by announcing that information when the user gets to that table. And if there are any design elements with no pedagogical value, if there's an icon that doesn't really add to the information, or if there's a decorative image like we spoke about, those do not need alt text descriptions. But anything that is flattened art, equations, photos, charts, graphs, maps, etc., that are non-decorative, that are actually adding to the information that is already there in the narrative text, those definitely need alt text descriptions. Equations set in MathML are interesting. Some readers actually support equations that are set in MathML and would read those equations correctly without any alt text. But the current WCAG standards and guidelines actually encourage to use alt text descriptions for equations as well as a fallback mechanisms for any readers that do not support MathML and reading equations that are there in MathML. In our opinion, the best person to create the alt text is the author, is the person actually creating that content. However, we have seen in the past as well that not every author wants to be involved with that process. So, when we write alt text, this is how we typically categorize them. I just wanted to present that as well. All images, except if they're decorative, need a short description. These are typically 150 characters or less, excluding spaces. Some images would need long descriptions. That would be images where the short description is not enough, and there is more information to be talked about. We categorize them as simple, moderate, and complex. For simple, these are images that have limited amount of information, relatively easy to describe. Obviously, reading surrounding text is necessary in all cases, and typically take less than 20 minutes to write. For moderate, images that have more information and require extensive reading and understanding of the surrounding text typically take between 20 and 40 minutes. And then there are complex images that might have multiple parts and would require extensive reading and understanding of the surrounding text, and take over 40 minutes to create. These are some basic guidelines for creating effective alt text descriptions. The most important element is to understand the context in which an image is being presented. And only when we understand the purpose of the visual element can we accurately describe it. So that is why the best person to do it would be the author, because they have thought of it and they have presented that image. But whoever is creating alt text descriptions and reviewing a component of a product for writing alt text descriptions has to understand the context in which it is being presented. And also what information is that image trying to communicate, right? There might be information in an image that can be that doesn't need to be addressed. It might not be necessary to describe the entire visual element in detail to convey its meaning. If there is any text included in the image, the alt text description should include the text if it's critical to the image and its understanding. We also want to be as concise as possible, keeping the alt text description as brief, and still providing the information that is being conveyed. We obviously start with the high-level context, drill down to the details that enhance the understanding and support the concepts that are being discussed in a logical order. You typically would use an active voice, in the present tense. You also do not need to add any additional information that is not in the image, should not become part of the alt text description, or any information that is already being covered in the narrative or the caption doesn't need to be included at all. You can include any information about color if it's important, but otherwise that information can be left out as well. And it should be, we need to make sure that we write alt text descriptions that are concise and clear and easy to be read by a screen reader. We should spell out abbreviations, for example, and that is helpful as well. And focus on the critical content And like everything else, that all content that is in the product, we have to make sure that the right grammar, right terminology is being used. Just because it's a different author writing alt text description, they should not be using different terminology compared with what is going on in the narrative text. All content in the product should be copy edited, and the same would be true for alt text descriptions as well, that they would need copy editing as well. You know, maybe by the same copy editor that has worked on the product. And the last thing would be review it in detail. You know, just read the alt text description without looking at the image and see if you are actually getting the same information that is being presented in the image. One of the tests that people typically do is, what if I was describing this image to somebody over the phone? Is this, you know, would they understand it if I just read out what is there on the in the alt text description? So some do nots, I think we covered some of them. Do not repeat the caption that is already there. Do not include the information that is not in the visual element. Do not include background details that do not support the purpose of or the context. Or obviously do not write alt text for decorative images or for any redundant content that might already exist in the narrative text. You also don't need to identify the type of visual element. You don't have to say this photo represents this unless the image has relevance to the user. So for example, if you're looking at a graph that has lines plotted, you might refer to that graph. Otherwise, you don't have to say this image, this photo, or this, you know, painting for that matter. You don't have to really describe what type of image it is. Let's look at a few examples at the end. So, you know, on the left-hand side is a photo with some narrative text around it. And, you know, what would you choose as the alt text for, you know, this image? You know, first, obviously, you need to consider its content and function. An image only has function if it has a area or, you know, that can be clicked. So this is not a functional image. This is, you know, more about information. And we need to sort of think about it. You know, what do we need to summarize from this image? What is the information that is being presented? In this example, the image content informs the user that this is Ellen Ochoa. Her suit further conveys the information that she is an astronaut, which is meaningful given obviously her achievement. Now, based on that, I think the most recommended alt text for this would be astronaut Ellen Ochoa. Image of Ellen Ochoa obviously has the word image in it, so we will stay away from that one. You know, the Ellen Ochoa, the first Hispanic woman to go into space, includes information that is not part of this image and is also redundant because it's already, you know, part of the text. An empty alt text attribute obviously would not be, you know, needed here because, you know, it does have information that is being presented. Now let's change that a little bit. You know, in this case, the name and the astronaut is now given under the image. You know, so what would we use as the alt text in this case? Using image or Ellen Ochoa would be redundant. So this would need an empty alt attribute or a null tag in this particular case. Here is another example, right? You can see a handshake, right? So what would you choose as an alt text for this image? What we basically have to consider is, in this case, is if this image was deleted, would any important information be lost? In this case, most likely not, right? Many images like this force us to have, you know, almost meaningless verbose alt text on screen readers, even they do not add to the information that is being presented. You know, handshake and businessmen shake hands to complete a contract, describe the image, but it is not important information, is not adding any value to it. So in this case, we would use an empty tag because it's a decorative image. And I think this is the last example I have in there. This is a more complicated sort of an example. There is a description at the bottom, which lends you to believe that the way the treatment of this image is important. Again, the context is most important, right? So we have to determine in what context this image is being provided, what is the surrounding text. In this case, the information in the image is not entirely in the surrounding narrative, but definitely is more challenging to write all text for this. So if we just said George Washington, for example, that's probably inadequate. There is a lot more going on. If we say painting of George Washington, that's better. But in this case, it probably would be appropriate to describe the image as a painting as opposed to a photograph, because that's what was being talked about, right? So we talked about how you don't have to describe what kind of an image it is, but in this case, it probably is important just because of the context that it's bearing in. Painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware River provides more information that may be helpful for users. And the final option, which is the more verbose option, might be appropriate if the art technique is more important. It may also be appropriate if a detailed examination of the painting is in order, right? So in this case, there is really no one right answer here. The best alternative text will depend on the context and the intended content of that image. And that is why the context of a particular image is the most important factor. And what kind of product it is, what are we trying to accomplish? That is truly the most important factor when you are trying to write alt text for images. I think that is the last example I had. Any questions I can answer?
We had one question that harkens back to the early part of your talk, in which you mentioned that image accessibility can reduce the risk of legal complications.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just wondering if you could expand on that. In what way does that play out?
So there are states that have laws in place where you have to have products that are compliant to 508 and WCAG guidelines. So in a simplistic case, you can have a disabled user that could sue a publisher for not being able to access content for that is available for people without that disability. So that is a definite risk that publishers face in today's marketplace.
Yep. And just to expand on that, that it's something that we do build into the platform, but of course we're dependent so much on the content that is flowing into the platform. So we do try to work with our publishers to make sure that we stay WCAG 2.1 compliant because so many of our institutions require it. So thank you so much. I thought that was really, really interesting to get into a little bit of the details there behind, what actually goes into making sure that we don't just adhere, we don't just check off the items, but actually, try to implement the spirit behind it. So now we've got a break, I think of 15 minutes. I just want to encourage everybody. There's a bunch of really interesting talks coming after the break. Actually, it looks like a little bit less than 15 minutes because I think we're gonna reconvene at 10:40. But we'll have a talk from the OA switchboard, and from Crossref, and from Stuart Maxwell from Scholarly IQ, who is the technology behind IntelWorks. So some interesting stuff coming after the break, but I'll let you go now, and we'll be back at it at 10:40. Thanks so much.